Signalis is a return to form for the survival horror genre, a game that harkens back to the days of psychological focused fear, horror that finds itself grasping at your mind rather than your skin. It's a slow build of terror that rises over time, something almost not noticed, like it's at the edge of the room creeping ever closer to you. My experience with the game mirrored this progression, a slow burn. Its horror and ability to spread fear are not its only strengths, though. The game's story and themes present a unique and interesting combination not often seen in today's modern landscape. A story that refuses to give its audience any hints or clues as to its ending, let alone its premise or meaning. These days, most popular stories that are told are incredibly in your face. The story is spoon-fed to you, as if you're a child still crying in diapers. Signalis again tries to bring us back to a better time, one where there was ample room given between details of a story, enough room that viewers could speculate as to the meanings of said details. We've talked about this style of storytelling before, especially in series like Silent Hill, of which Signalis takes great inspiration. The game makes you find the story for yourself over time. There's still some enjoyment in just playing the game once, though. You'll still feel something, but the story you experience will stay tethered to that emotional realm rather than the more practical, physical one. The game's art is on another level. Its cutscenes are quick, jumpy, fast, and emotional. The detailed pixel art graphics provide a unique and individual style to a wonderful experience. This is all to say that Signalis is made up of its inspirations, but the game also carries the torch that its predecessors left. It's part of a new generation of genuine, honest, and unique survival horror games. It stands as a light in the horror scene to illustrate that this genre is not dead, not left to the jump scares and screams. Today, we're going to dive deep into Signalis. We'll be talking about gameplay, story, mechanics, and everything in between. Hi, Dad. It's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Signalis. Before we get into the game, I'd like to provide a few notes. The first is about the nature of this video. This structure is going to be slightly different than that of my previous videos. Since Signalis is a much newer game, the beginning portion of my review will be spoiler-free. I'd like to first provide you with a general impressions section of the game, specifically for the people that want to play the game but are on the fence or would like to know my feelings on it first. So fear not, I won't be genuinely spoiling the game until we talk about story. There will be some minor tonal spoilers when talking about my impressions of the game. If you're incredibly sensitive to that, then just go play the game now. After I give you my impressions, we will then go back through Signalis' story on a surface level, much like I did in my Silent Hill videos. We'll then briefly talk about the influences of Signalis and then go back to talk about what exactly happens in Signalis. In short, if you don't want spoilers, only watch the impressions section of the video. Signalis is a classic survival horror game. At least that statement holds true when talking about its gameplay and tone, but doesn't really extend into style. A general session of Signalis will see us traveling the corridors of a mostly abandoned space station, fighting enemies between rooms, trying to retrieve key items, and solving puzzles. It's this classic feel and design that makes Signalis feel old, but in the most new way possible. It harkens back to the days of Silent Hill. Traveling the hallways of the hospital can feel just like traversing the hallways of Signalis' hellish environments. We can combat these enemies with a variety of weapons: a pistol, shotgun, SMG, rifle, even a flare gun. These weapons are used pretty simply, loading them up, aiming at enemies, and taking fire. In classic survival horror style, it is of course much faster to reload through the menu rather than in real time. There's some more complexity introduced to combat early in the game though. Enemies don't die after you've downed them. They will come back if we don't use a thermite flare on them. There are a finite amount of these in the game though, so we have to choose wisely. I will point out, within combat lies some of my biggest complaints with the game. Some of the aiming can be quite finicky, and in a pinch, finicky is not really what you want. There were make-or-break moments where the aiming system failed me, and those carried more impact in my opinion than the more trivial ones. Signalis also seems to have a weird issue with picking up the input for traveling through doors to the next area if entered too fast. When trying to run away from enemies, it seems pretty important that the game functions like you'd expect it to. There were many moments, though, where it didn't, and that was my biggest issue. This leads to some particularly frustrating moments. It's quite a small issue, but I think it's worthy of pointing out. It's also notable because I played Signalis months and months after its initial release, so you would think these things would be patched out by now. There is some leeway to be given considering the game was made by a two-person development team, but it's again still worth noting. Another large part of Signalis' gameplay is its resource management. Choosing how and when to use weapons, ammo, and items is incredibly important in this game, because as we go on, resources become much more scarce. This actually ties into the game's Rule of Six system. This is a protocol within the game world that requires people to only carry 6 items on them at a time. This is, of course, just an in-world excuse to limit our inventory. Safe rooms allow us to use a storage chest, though, and save. Every time we're in one of these rooms, we spend a real time thinking about what we'll need to bring with us for this journey. Whether we're seeking out a quest item or trying to get resources, the risk-reward here is incredibly important. Taking less ammunition can mean more room for better resources, but there's more chance of death. Taking more weapons could mean you have a better chance to get the items you need and survive, but you could come across some really good items and have to make another trip because you don't have the room, or worse, have to sacrifice other items to make room. This inventory system is fantastic. It adds another thought to the theater of anxiety that exists within Signalis. So we spend much of the game journeying out to find key items and progress the story, but what are these key items used for? Signalis features many puzzles that seek to further the actual main narrative of the game. These puzzles are very well done. They usually tie into the game's tone or theme, sometimes even fleshing out the world around us a little more. I should also point out that the puzzles are not incredibly difficult. Sometimes older survival horror games can have puzzles that just take forever to figure out, and when you do get the answer, you realize you could have randomly guessed solutions and it would have been faster than actually figuring it out. Signalis doesn't have this issue. Each puzzle has its own logic. It feels like it makes sense, and the next step of the game never sees you fumbling around in the dark for clues. You always have a goal, and therefore progress feels genuine and earned. The art of the game should be noted here as one of its largest strengths. It's an incredibly gorgeous piece of work. Most cutscenes, like I said before, are incredibly fast. The game wants us to feel what these scenes are showing us, their first impressions, for instance, rather than dissect them just yet. That's for a second and third playthrough. The first time we watch these scenes, we are to glean exactly what we can see in the short seconds that we're allowed to view them. The longer shots that are held on are the ones we're allowed to appreciate. Signalis is a mix of cutscenes using the models from the game and full pixel art scenes. Both are gorgeous, packed with emotion and information. We can also see tons of inspiration from Hideaki Anno here. Evangelion is just all over this thing. The environments are well designed, even the menus and the UI. The game is made to be an ode to old-era survival horror games, with a CRT mode included in the game to make your flat screen replicate the feelings of screen glow youth. The soundtrack should not go understated, though. It plays a massive part in giving the game its tone and feel. It was composed by Cicada Sirens and 1000 Eyes. The whole package is distinct, unique, and stylized. It's incredibly stripped back and simple, but also unnerving at the same time. You almost don't notice the songs behind the game because they interweave themselves into the entire experience. The game doesn't feel like it's making noise at you. It feels like the noise is a part of the actual thing. It's incredibly well done, and the whole thing makes you feel terrified when just walking down an empty corridor. All of these things come together to make Signalis an incredible and wonderful experience for any survival horror fan. I would highly recommend this game to anyone that's on the fence or hasn't heard of it, but just talking about these things is leaving out a massive strength of Signalis, and that's its story. Massive spoilers ahead. You've been warned. Signalis begins as our character, Elster, awakes from a pod on a ship. After exploring the ship, we find out that it's crashed and its controls are no longer working. We find a photograph of a white-haired woman and some evidence of another passenger aboard our ship, the Penrose. We eventually solve a puzzle to get the airlock open and are taken out into the snowy landscape outside. We journey down a massive hole and find an opening in the wall that leads into a small room. This room, which has distinct personality to it, a flag, some photographs, a dirtiness to it, and a book laying on the table. The game describes this book as an ancient tome called The King in Yellow. When we pick up the book, we get a cutscene, some German words, some numbers, quick flashes of our character, a painting, excerpts from H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival with large focus on the words "Remember Our Promise," ending on "Wake Up" and the title card for the game. Now, there are a ton of things here that have a lot of significance to the game's plot that I will actually decode in a section at the end of the video, where I talk about my interpretation of the story. For now, we can leave it as an intriguing mystery. We open on a new scene in Sierpinski Station. Chapter 1, Synchronicity. Elster is in a bathroom looking at herself in a mirror. We make our way throughout this station, finding a dying replica and showing her a picture of the woman we're looking for. She tells us that the woman might be down in the mines, a worker on the station. We meet another woman named Isa and gain access to the elevators, taking us down another level. Searching through this level, gaining access to different areas and keys, we find a mysterious artifact. When we inspect this artifact, we get a scene in first person. This is one of my favorite parts of Signalis that I think makes it distinct from other PS1-like survival horror games. Exploring these environments from different perspectives gives us a massive change of pace that can also set itself apart from other scenes. Maybe we're playing a different character. Maybe this is a different time, maybe a memory. We don't know. All we know is that it's different. It's also a little more personal. Being in the first person makes us feel like we're inhabiting the character, bringing us closer to the game and closer to the horror. Here, we're at some sort of radio station. This acts as a tutorial to a new module that we have access to, the radio module. This is accessible in our menu and will allow us to tune into different radio frequencies. This will become a vital asset in many puzzles moving forward. It's a wonderful mechanic that adds an entirely new element to the game. Our puzzles are no longer just visual and physical, they now inhabit the realm of the auditory as well. It's a great new way to add some depth to the mysteries, flavor to the world, and it also happens to tie into the story as well, but we'll get there. We have to use it to get into a safe that has a tree on it. We, earlier in the game, receive a list of frequencies, one titled Tree. Connect the simple dots and we can get the safe open. This gives us access to the elevator again, which takes us lower into the facility. Our goal here is to solve multiple puzzles, which give us keys, 5 in total, that we need to open a door leading deeper into the facility. Once we get all these keys, we fight a large boss and move forward. We meet a man named Adler who welcomes us to the facility and then pushes Elster down an elevator shaft. We're then in control of Isa, who is looking for another student named Erica. We see the girl being bullied and Elster wakes up at the bottom of the elevator shaft. We've now entered the lower levels of the facility, and our goal here is to enter the mining levels below. We need an administrator key, and solving multiple puzzles will give it to us. We're introduced to new enemy types, one specifically that we have to defeat by tuning into different signals. We eventually get access to the mining levels and we see Issa stab Adler and push him into a hole. Traversing the mining area, we eventually find a hole. Jumping inside, we find ourselves on a beach, reading notes left behind by someone. Elster wakes up in a place called Nowhere. Here we have to find 6 different plates before we can move forward. This area is clearly much more sinister than the others. We've ditched the spaceship sci-fi-like areas of the station above and have now descended into the fleshy, eldritch horror that lies below. After we open the door, we find ourselves in a room much like the one from the beginning of the game. Adler sits in some ancient place, a knife in his eye. Elster wanders that same place. We see some cryptic imagery, and she eventually breaks her arm trying to gain access to the crashed ship. And that's it. The game ends. Is what I'm sure many people that played Signalis thought, because that isn't nearly the end for our adventure. Hitting begin again on the main menu will return us to the ship from the beginning of the game, except things are a little different. We have an inspection list on the ship that is still flying through space. We eventually talk to our Gestalt scout officer, a woman named Ariane, and the two are clearly in love. We see some cutscenes about a promise again. Elster is wounded from before and takes apart another replica to fix her arm, determined to continue on and fulfill this promise. We journey along the beach once again and begin Chapter 3, Gestaltzerfall. Elster is back in the same bathroom as before, but now considerably more fleshy. This new area is a fusion of many areas that we've seen previously, and lots of new ones. The goal here is to find 6 tarot cards and match them up with the planets that they describe. Solving one final puzzle will take us back to the room that we began the game with. Here, we will once again interact with the King in Yellow, and we can exit this room in our normal view. In this final room, we learn some more about Ariane's past, and we have our final boss fight with Falk, the commanding officer of our replica unit. This boss fight is the pinnacle of difficulty across the course of our game. Maybe I was just poorly prepared, but I had just enough ammo and healing items to make it through the thing. I tried it 4 times, and the final time I had exactly 0 bullets left when I defeated Falk. This fight sees us going through multiple different rooms and fighting off the massive beast in an epic bout. We see a final cutscene. Elster kills Adler, some deformed version of him, and boards the ship once again. We journey throughout the vehicle, finding many notes from Ariane and learning more about her past and feelings on the mission and Elster herself. We eventually get our ending, of which there are 4. In my ending, Memory, Ariane does not remember Elster, and Elster cannot fulfill the promise while she dies by Ariane's side. That's the gist of the story that Signalis presents. Before we talk about the other endings to Signalis and what exactly they all mean, we should probably talk about the story in general. Before we get too deep into that, though, let's quickly talk about the inspirations for the story, because there are many. These are incredibly important in understanding the story and the tone that the game is going for. Some of the connections won't become incredibly clear until we explain the story itself, but for now it's worth pointing them out. The biggest one that Signalis seems to cite and straight up put into their game is The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow was a collection of short stories written by Robert W. Chambers in 1895. The version that we see in game is actually the cover of one of the first published editions of the book. The King in Yellow as a title is a reference to a fictional play, featured as a motif throughout the stories. The play references a fictional place called Carcosa that influences the main character of the first story, Repairer of Reputations, into a period of madness. The fictional entity, the King in Yellow, is yet again separate, but has play over the stories as well. The King in Yellow pushes itself into the minds of those who read it, and therein lies its connection to Signalis. You may also be familiar with The King in Yellow from its myriad of appearances and references in other media, most notably the groundbreaking first season of the HBO series True Detective. The game specifically quotes the end passage of H.P. Lovecraft's short story, The Festival. The festival concerns itself with a man who journeys back to his family's home for a Yuletide festival, which turns out to be a summoning ritual for some grotesque creatures and a lineage of horror. Signalis takes inspiration less from the festival and more from the Lovecraft itself. Its imagery of fleshy and ancient subterranean beings bring to mind a more general inspiration from the man's tone and themes. Two paintings are heavily featured in the game, The Shores of Oblivion by Eugen Brocht and The Isle of the Dead by Arnold Brocklin. Both paintings share some similarities. They both seem to feature themes of death, though being quite open to interpretation. They both had multiple versions that were painted of them, and they were both German paintings. They were also both held by the German Emperor and King of Prussia, Wilhelm II. The paintings have a larger role to play, one we will get back to in a moment. The developers of Signalis also cite Kubrick, Hideaki Anno, and Lynch as some of their film influences. We can see the nonlinear storytelling of Lynch, the horror of Kubrick, and the visual style of Anno all very present in Signalis. It's also worth pointing out that Signalis features the three-note oddity, a very famous sequence of tones from a numbers station. Number stations are radio stations that supposedly broadcast numbers to intelligence officers who know what the codes mean. There are many theories surrounding these stations, ranging from mild to bizarre. The largest and most prevalent inspiration that Signalis has, though, is probably Silent Hill. If you're not familiar with Silent Hill, I would highly recommend taking a quick look at my very brief video on the entire series. Spoiler warning for Silent Hill here. Silent Hill is clearly a huge inspiration on the tone, style, and gameplay of Signalis, but also on the story. The story concerns itself with a woman who projects their emotions and feelings onto the physical world. Mounds of flesh take over our environments and block us from entering rooms. Our story is told mostly through memos and environmental clues. There's a myriad of occult imagery in the game. The game even contains many levels where we must progress by collecting artifacts and placing them in a door. The final level, being a collection of tarot cards, also just screams Silent Hill. Even Issa's death toward the end of the game mirrors Lisa's death towards the end of Silent Hill. The list of similarities goes on, and there clearly would not be a Signalis without Silent Hill. There is a certain point where the distinction almost becomes unclear. I don't view this as derivative. In my original Silent Hill video, I noted that Silent Hill's legacy wouldn't die, that it would be carried on by the fans of the games that were inspired by its legendary presence. Games like Signalis were exactly what I had in mind. They take the things they love and create something incredible, something new from them. Before we get deep into what actually happens in the game Signalis, we should probably talk about the world. This background, lore, information, and history will slowly reveal itself over the course of the game. Since Signalis' universe is incredibly different from our own in structure, level of technological advancement, and history, it's going to be a large unknown for quite a bit of the game. But just like survival horror classics, a lot of this information is optional and will be revealed through memos and notes in the game. Signalis is a sci-fi story. Space travel is clearly possible in this universe, but they still use old technology like floppy disks and cassettes. This could be an homage to something like the style of the Alien films. But in Signalis, there's something called bioresonance. Bioresonance is a gift that a select number of people have access to. It's also something that people don't understand very well, a science that is still being studied. There seems to be some sort of connecting thread that everyone in the universe follows. People with bioresonance can seemingly both see the way that the universe works and control it with their emotions. The Grand Empress is a figure in the history of Signalis that was considered bioresonant. She became the leader of the Empire, a massive institution set on spreading its influence as far as possible. The Yusan Empire would eventually colonize multiple planets in the solar system. It was successful only because of the bioresonance available in the Empress. This enabled their technological discovery to be sped up. One of the technologies that would do the most to influence the governance of the universe was replicas. Replicas are mechanical humanoids that are used to complete various tasks from mining to cooking. They have a very distinct pecking order, being overseen by a Falk unit, the highest commander, working together with the Adler units, who physically oversee the rest of the squad. Elster units are used to assist in orbital missions. This is the purpose of our unit, the one we play in Signalis. Replicas are connected to a gestalt, the mind that created them. This connection is not very well understood, though, and can sometimes result in the replica intertwining the gestalt's memories with their own. The replicas were eventually used by a rebel faction called the Nation to rise against the Empire and take it over. The Nation became incredibly authoritarian, banning books and media that did not conform to their beliefs. During this rebellion, some heavy battles and fighting took place on Veneta. One of the soldiers there became the origin for the Elster model because of her resilience and isolation. Her name was Lilith Ito. She had a friend named Alina Seo. Seo was in the same unit as Lilith, and she kept a picture of the two long after her service. After her time in the military, Lilith would move to Rotfront and open a bookstore with her 2 children. The twins would become friends with a girl named Ariane, whose family also ran a shop nearby. Ariane lived with her mother on a remote radio station on Rotfront, far from the civilization that most people knew. Because of this, Ariane didn't have to worry about banned books or music or films. She could watch or read anything she wanted. She eventually moved into civilization at the behest of her aunt, and this shift was something that wasn't very easy for Ariane. She was bullied and only found solace in the friendship of the twins. The Ito girls eventually joined the military service and left Ariane alone. This caused Ariane to become more isolated, and she eventually found the picture of Alina Seo, who bared a striking resemblance to Ariane. She again longed for the isolation she had when she was living at the radio station. She decided to join the Penrose program because of this, which was a Yusan Nation institution that searched for habitable planets further out in space. Ariane found the freedom she wanted, now able to experience the joy of the media that she knew before. She left the upkeep of the ship to her Elster unit that the Penrose program provided her. Over time, Ariane began to befriend her Elster unit, which was forbidden by the manuals that came with it. This would effectively disrupt the minds of the Elster units and merge the Gestalt memories with it. The two fell in love, somehow a generation later, continuing the bond between someone who looked like Lilith and someone who looked like Seo. The goal for the Penrose program seemed to be to reach Cycle 3000, which is the milestone when they would receive new orders. Before this milestone could be reached, Ariane began to grow sick. Once they got their new orders, they were given bad news. If they hadn't found a habitable planet by now, then there wouldn't be one. Elster was given the order to kill Ariane to put her out of her misery. Ariane was becoming ill because the ship was breaking down. Ariane asked Elster to put her out of her misery, but because the Elster unit was compromised, she couldn't. The Elster unit eventually died, and Ariane was left in the cryopod of the ship, left to exist in a between state, not life or death. This is where Signalis begins. With all that established, we can truly get into the real story of what happens in Signalis. That story concerned everything that happened before the game actually began, but that leaves one question: what exactly happens in the story of the game? And that answer is a little bit more nebulous. I do want to preface this section by saying that what I've said before about interpretations is incredibly true. This is just my interpretation. This is how I view the events of the game. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. I don't believe that there is a true interpretation out there. Even the developers themselves have said that they included multiple endings because they didn't believe there was a true ending. If you disagree or have a different interpretation of the game's story, leave a comment below. So, to start this off, I believe that Ariane is a bioresonant. There are multiple pieces of information in the game to support this, but I think the biggest is the inspiration with Silent Hill itself. See, Ariane, in her sick and dying state, used her bioresonant powers, probably unknowingly, to project her nightmare, her dying thoughts and insecurities, onto the world. The created nightmare world that we traverse throughout the game. Does this sound familiar? That's because it sounds exactly like Alessa from Silent Hill, projecting her nightmare onto the town. Ariane projected this nightmare outward, creating a mishmash of the places that she remembered from her childhood and from her life. She also created Elster, the unit that she fell in love with. The Elster, retaining its memories from its gestalt and its life before, tried to fulfill its promise to kill Ariane. It failed many times, over and over again it tried. For some reason, the Adler unit seems to know that this is a cycle that keeps repeating, and that he's done this before. This could possibly be because something is retained in the unit that Ariane can't control, or because Ariane is dying and her powers are weakening, showing a lesser control on reality. Elster tries to fulfill her promise to Ariane, and this is what we see during the first, or the fake ending of the game. She finds the Penrose and dies trying to help Ariane, but she also gains some sort of clarity. She sees all of the different realities, all the different times that she's tried this. This is why she comes out of the other side with a renewed determination. I think the sickness that has spread itself throughout the Sierpinski facility is probably the reflection of Ariane's own sickness, the one that she's currently dealing with. Whether this is a dream world Sierpinski or the real Sierpinski facility is uncertain. The replicas were infected with this sickness as well, and because they didn't have organic bodies, they became the monstrous creatures that we see in the game. When Elster eventually makes her journey through the nightmare world called Nowhere, she returns to the room that Ariane lived in at the radio station. Here, she breaks the final seal on the door to allow her to leave the nightmare. Falk, too, was affected by Ariane's sickness, accidentally taking on the qualities of the Elster unit and searching for Ariane. This is why she is our final boss battle. Adler was mutated by the nightmare, and Elster killed him before moving on. After this, the events of the game are variable based on the actions that you took throughout your playthrough. The system that the game uses to determine the ending you receive is very much a Silent Hill-like system. The game measures your behavior, your actions towards the inhabitants of the world, or the way that you do things, rather than a specific item found or not found. There are 4 endings in total. The first ending, or the one that I received, saw Elster eventually returning to the Penrose and finding Ariane, but Ariane did not remember who Elster was. Elster dies and stays by Ariane's side. No ending is a sure thing, just like Silent Hill 2, but there are certain things you can do to try and sway the ending in the way that you want. The memory ending can be achieved if you complete the game fast, in under 6 hours, ignore NPCs, get through flashback sections quick, avoid fights, and don't get hit. The second ending, titled Leave, sees Elster refusing to even enter the cryogenics room. She removes her armor and dies on the surface of the planet. This ending is achieved by killing less enemies, healing quickly, spending a long time in flashbacks, talking to NPCs, and trying to open doors that you can't. The third ending, Promise, sees Elster fulfilling her promise to Ariane and taking her life while she dies beside her. This ending is achieved by killing a lot of enemies, getting hit a lot, not healing, dying a lot, and taking a long time with the game. The fourth and final ending, Artifact, is a little more uncertain. This ending is actually achieved not by beating the game naturally, but by unlocking a safe. We have to find 3 keys throughout the course of the game: the key of love, the key of eternity, and the key of sacrifice. The keys then unlock the safe in Ariane's room after the moon puzzle. Inside, we find a pot of white lilies. We then see Elster placing the lilies in some sort of ritual. She dies, and 5 other dead Elsters surround her. At the center is a glowing object. We see a red eye dangling above the Penrose, and Elster and Ariane dance together. Each ending is different, and I wouldn't go as far as to pick a canon ending for the game. I think the story is vague enough that you can pick an ending that you think is appropriate. The secret ending is, in my opinion, something closer to the rebirth ending from Silent Hill 2. If I had to pick an ending that I thought was a good close to the story, it would probably be the Promise ending. In this ending, Elster fulfills her promise to Ariane. It's dark and pretty bleak, but it seems like everything is over for the time. Elster got what she wanted. Ariane got what she wanted. Even though the 2 are dead, all is well in the world. Signalis is truly something special in today's modern landscape. Honestly, horror today doesn't give one a great outlook on the genre as a whole. You don't expect good horror projects to be coming out faster than you can play them. Horror as a whole has been more influenced by Amnesia and FNAF than it has by Silent Hill or Clock Tower these days. We don't often see large, massive games that break waves and make headlines that take from the survival horror giants. So I have to say, as a fan of the classics, it's a great sign that games like these are being made and are well received. Signalis is a great trip, a genuine psychological entry, unsettling throughout its entire runtime, never venturing to push its horror into your face, but rather slither in through your skin. It's a slow, permeating kind of thing, rather than a hammer to the head. The story has classic themes given new life, like one we didn't even talk about in that of the Ship of Theseus, which can be completely missed on a first-time playthrough. The themes of eldritch horror, insanity, and love are all at the forefront. The entire time we're playing, we constantly ask whether this is a dream, not one being projected from Ariane onto reality, but a normal dream inside someone's head. It's a wonderful tale, and something that keeps us guessing the entire time we're playing. But the important part here is that it's interesting enough to keep us playing. We want to know what's on the other side of the door with 5 locks. We want just another tidbit, a drip feed of information. We need to know even just a little bit more. I think as a culture, we are starved of this kind of unique content, these pieces of media that refuse to give us literal meanings right away or possibly at all. I commend Signalis for denying us this modern pleasure, for saying no to our rabid bestial needs, but to offer us something in exchange, a slow inlet of information, style, presentation, and substance. I commend Signalis for its design, beautiful environments, odd puzzles, new mechanics, and difficult encounters. I commend Signalis for its unsettling music, its pervasive sound design, its mighty imagery, and its referential themes. Because Signalis deserves to be commended, it deserves to have the spotlight. I know that the game got a significant amount of praise, but studios like this deserve to be given the limelight and have ample time and money to make another project as interesting and ambitious as this one. Signalis is fantastic, and if you haven't played it yet, then you must. Bye, Dad.